I'm Cassandra Mitchell, 24 years old, and today should have been the proudest day of my life. Instead, I'm standing in my empty apartment, adjusting my cap and gown while my phone shows 0 missed calls, 0 messages from my family. 4 years of medical school, countless sleepless nights, and they chose my brother's baseball game over my graduation ceremony. But this wasn't just forgetfulness. This was deliberate, calculated cruelty that would push me to make the most drastic decision of my life. Before we dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you're ready to hear about the most shocking family betrayal and the revenge that followed, smash that like button and hit subscribe, because this journey is going to blow your mind. Trust me, you won't believe how far some families will go to destroy their own children. Growing up as the eldest child in the Mitchell family, I learned early that love was conditional and favoritism was the family currency. My parents, Robert and Susan Mitchell, made it crystal clear from the moment my brother Jake was born that he was their golden child, their shining star, while I was merely the practice round. Every family dinner conversation revolved around Jake's baseball achievements, his potential college scholarships, his promising future in professional sports. Meanwhile, my academic accomplishments were dismissed with a casual "that's nice, honey," before the conversation inevitably shifted back to Jake's latest game statistics. Throughout high school, while Jake received private coaching, expensive equipment, and endless emotional support for his mediocre baseball skills, I worked 2 part-time jobs to save money for college. My parents claimed they were investing in Jake's future because sports scholarships were real money, while academic achievements were just pieces of paper. When I graduated valedictorian, they missed the ceremony because Jake had a tournament 3 hours away. When I received a full academic scholarship to pre-med, they complained about having to drive me to orientation because it conflicted with Jake's practice schedule. Medical school amplified this dynamic to unbearable levels. While Jake coasted through community college on a partial baseball scholarship that barely covered his textbooks, I was drowning in student loans, working nights at the hospital cafeteria, and studying until dawn. My parents bragged to neighbors about Jake's promising baseball career while referring to my medical studies as Cassandra's expensive hobby. They attended every single one of Jake's games, traveling across 3 states to cheer him on, but claimed they were too busy to visit me during my clinical rotations. The breaking point came 6 weeks before graduation, when I made one final, desperate plea for their support. I called a family meeting and explained how important this ceremony was to me, how it represented 4 years of sacrifice and dedication, how it would mean everything to have them there. My father listened with barely concealed irritation, while my mother scrolled through her phone, checking Jake's game schedule. They promised they would be there, swore they wouldn't miss it for anything, and I actually believed them. But 2 weeks before the ceremony, Jake's coach scheduled a meaningless mid-season game for the exact same day and time as my graduation. When I reminded my parents of their promise, my father shrugged and said baseball was Jake's livelihood, while my medical degree was guaranteed, regardless of who showed up. My mother added that Jake needed their support more than I did because I was strong enough to handle disappointment. My sister Emma, 3 years younger and already fully indoctrinated into the family's hierarchy, chimed in that Jake's future in professional baseball was more important than my little graduation ceremony. The morning of graduation, I called my parents one final time, hoping against hope they would surprise me. My mother answered with fake sweetness, claiming they were getting ready to leave and would definitely be there. I should have known better. As I sat in the auditorium, watching hundreds of families celebrate their children's achievements, my phone remained silent. During the ceremony intermission, I finally called them. My father answered from what was clearly a baseball stadium, with crowd noise and announcer commentary in the background. He claimed there had been a family emergency with Jake, and they couldn't possibly leave him. The humiliation was suffocating. Fellow graduates kept asking where my family was, and I had to smile and make excuses about last-minute emergencies. The dean of the medical school, who knew my family situation, gave me sympathetic looks that made everything worse. When my name was called and I walked across that stage to receive my diploma, the silence from the audience section was deafening. Everyone else had cheering families, proud parents capturing every moment on camera. I had empty chairs, and the sound of my own heartbeat echoing in my ears. But the real gut punch came later that evening when I checked social media. There were my parents, beaming with pride at Jake's game, holding signs that read, "Go Jake" and "Proud Baseball Parents." My mother had posted dozens of photos with captions about how proud they were of their amazing son and his incredible dedication. Jake had hit a routine single in the seventh inning, nothing spectacular, nothing career-defining, just an ordinary play in an ordinary game. Yet they celebrated it like he had won the World Series, while I sat alone in my apartment, still wearing my graduation gown, staring at my diploma that nobody cared about. The betrayal cut deeper when my Aunt Margaret called later that night. She was the only family member who had ever shown me genuine support, and I thought she might offer some comfort. Instead, she dropped a bomb that shattered my remaining illusions. She revealed that there was a family group chat where my parents had been discussing their plan to skip my graduation for weeks. They had never intended to come. The promise was just a way to keep me quiet until it was too late for me to make other arrangements or find alternative support. They had deliberately chosen Jake's meaningless game over the culmination of my life's work, and they had planned this cruelty in advance. The aftermath of graduation day revealed the true extent of my family's calculated cruelty. When my parents returned home from Jake's game, they didn't offer apologies or explanations. Instead, they launched into an elaborate performance designed to rewrite history and gaslight me into believing their version of events. My mother called me with theatrical concern, claiming they had barely missed the ceremony due to unexpected traffic and Jake's game running overtime. She spoke as if this was a tragic accident rather than a deliberate choice, her voice dripping with fake sympathy, as she promised they would make it up to me somehow. My father's approach was more direct and brutal. When I confronted him about their betrayal, he dismissed my pain with casual indifference, claiming graduation was just a piece of paper and that I was being overly dramatic about a simple ceremony. He actually laughed when I mentioned the emotional significance of the day, telling me that real accomplishments happened in the professional world, not at fancy dress-up parties for adults. According to him, Jake's baseball game had real implications for the family's future, while my medical degree was guaranteed regardless of who witnessed the ceremony. The family dinner the following Sunday became a coordinated attack on my achievements and character. My parents had spent the week crafting their narrative, and they presented it with united conviction. Jake's baseball scholarship, they claimed, represented real money and tangible value for the family, while my student loans were just debt that would take decades to pay off. They spoke about Jake's natural talent and bright future in professional sports, while describing my medical career as just another job that anyone could do with enough studying. My sister Emma, always eager to please our parents, parroted their talking points with disturbing precision. She had been coached to emphasize how Jake's success would benefit the entire family, potentially leading to professional contracts and financial security for everyone. My achievements, in contrast, were portrayed as selfish pursuits that drained family resources without giving anything back. Emma actually suggested that I should be grateful my parents had invested so much in Jake's future because it would ultimately benefit me too. The most devastating blow came when my cousin Diana joined the attack. Diana had always been my closest confidant among the extended family, someone I trusted with my deepest fears and frustrations. But during that dinner, she revealed herself as another puppet in my parents' manipulation campaign. She spoke about practical careers versus impractical dreams, suggesting that Jake's athletic pursuits were more grounded in reality than my medical aspirations. Her betrayal stung because I had shared so much vulnerability with her, and she was now using that intimacy to wound me more effectively. Even my grandmother Ruth, the supposed family matriarch whose opinion carried enormous weight, sided completely with my parents. She delivered a lecture about family loyalty and supporting the member with the greatest potential for success. In her calculation, Jake's baseball career offered more promise than my medical degree, and I was being ungrateful and selfish for expecting the family to prioritize my needs over his. Her words carried particular pain because she had raised me to value education and hard work, yet she was now dismissing both in favor of Jake's mediocre athletic abilities. The gaslighting campaign extended beyond family dinners into my broader social circle. My parents had crafted a version of events that painted them as loving, supportive parents who had made a difficult choice during a family emergency. They spread this narrative throughout our small hometown, gaining sympathy and support from neighbors, family, friends, and community members. Former classmates who saw the social media posts about Jake's game assumed I was being unreasonable for expecting my parents to miss such an important moment in his athletic career. When I attempted to defend myself on social media, sharing screenshots of the family group chat where they discussed skipping my graduation, the response was swift and devastating. My parents immediately launched a counterattack that portrayed me as mentally unstable and vindictive. They claimed I was having a breakdown from the stress of medical school and was lashing out at the family members who loved me most. My father used his connections in the business community to spread concerns about my emotional stability, while my mother played the role of the heartbroken parent dealing with a troubled child. The manipulation was so effective that several family friends contacted my residency program to express concerns about my mental health. My supervisor called me into a private meeting to discuss troubling reports about my behavior and stability. I was forced to sit through a humiliating conversation where my professional competence was questioned based on my family's lies. The irony was suffocating. In trying to expose their cruelty, I had given them ammunition to destroy my medical career before it even began. Faced with the choice between fighting back and losing everything I had worked for, I made the devastating decision to delete my social media posts and issue a public apology to my family. I had to swallow my pride, admit I was wrong to air family business publicly, and beg forgiveness for my inappropriate behavior. The words tasted like poison as I typed them, but my medical career hung in the balance. My parents had successfully weaponized my professional aspirations against me, forcing me to participate in my own humiliation to protect my future. The victory lap my family took after my forced apology was perhaps the most painful part of the entire ordeal. They accepted my apology with magnanimous grace, publicly forgiving me for my emotional outburst while privately gloating about their complete dominance. Jake basked in the attention, playing the role of the innocent victim who had graciously forgiven his mentally unstable sister. My parents received waves of support from the community for their patience and understanding in dealing with such a difficult child. The weeks following my forced apology revealed the true depth of my family's malice. Rather than being satisfied with their victory, they seemed energized by my humiliation and determined to push their advantage further. What I initially believed was a cruel but isolated incident of favoritism was actually the beginning of a sustained campaign designed to destroy my reputation, my career, and my sense of self-worth. They had tasted blood, and they wanted more. My father, Robert Mitchell, leveraged his position as a successful local businessman to systematically undermine my professional reputation throughout the medical community. He began making subtle inquiries about my stability and fitness for practice during his networking events and business meetings. His approach was masterfully manipulative, never directly accusing me of incompetence, but instead expressing fatherly concern about the pressures I was facing and whether I was handling them appropriately. He planted seeds of doubt with physicians, hospital administrators, and medical board members who respected his standing in the community. The Whisper campaign gained momentum when my father arranged lunch meetings with influential doctors in our region. During these seemingly innocent social gatherings, he would share carefully crafted anecdotes about my concerning behavior and emotional instability. He described my social media posts as evidence of a mental breakdown and suggested that the stress of medical school had pushed me beyond my psychological limits. His performance was so convincing that several physicians expressed genuine concern about allowing someone with my issues to treat patients. Meanwhile, my mother Susan orchestrated a more insidious form of sabotage through her extensive network of healthcare workers and medical support staff. She worked as a part-time administrator at a local clinic, which gave her access to informal communication channels throughout the medical community. During coffee breaks and lunch conversations, she would share her heartbreak about having a daughter who was struggling with mental health issues and making concerning decisions. Her approach was even more effective than my father's because it came across as a mother's genuine worry rather than professional criticism. The culmination of their professional sabotage came when anonymous complaints were filed against me with the state medical board. These complaints, obviously coordinated by my family but impossible to prove, questioned my mental fitness to practice medicine and included references to my public breakdown on social media. The complaints were vague enough to avoid obvious defamation, but specific enough to trigger a formal investigation. My residency supervisor was required to attend meetings with medical board representatives to discuss my concerning behavior patterns. The financial warfare began simultaneously with the professional attacks. My parents suddenly demanded immediate repayment of a small loan they had provided during my undergraduate years. This loan, originally presented as a family gift with no expectation of repayment, was suddenly reframed as a formal debt with accumulated interest. They claimed my recent behavior had demonstrated that I was financially irresponsible and they needed to protect their investment. The timing was clearly designed to create maximum stress during my already difficult residency period. When I protested that the money had been a gift, they produced a handwritten promissory note that I had supposedly signed years earlier. The document looked authentic, complete with my signature, but I had no memory of signing any formal agreement. Later, I realized they must have had me sign it among a stack of other papers during some routine family business, never explaining what it was. Their long-term planning was both impressive and terrifying. They had been preparing for this moment for years, setting up legal and financial traps that could be activated whenever they needed leverage against me. The legal threats escalated when my parents claimed they were considering suing me for emotional damages resulting from my social media posts. They argued that my false accusations had damaged their reputation in the community and caused them significant psychological distress. Their lawyers sent official letters demanding not only retraction of my statements, but also monetary compensation for the harm I had caused to their standing. The irony was staggering. They were claiming emotional damage from my attempt to expose their emotional abuse. My access to financial resources was systematically eliminated through a series of coordinated actions. The family insurance policy that had been covering some of my final medical school expenses was suddenly canceled due to my changed status as an adult child. A small savings account that my parents had managed since my childhood was frozen pending review of account ownership. Even my access to the family cell phone plan was terminated, forcing me to scramble for alternative service during my demanding residency schedule. Jake's role in this escalated campaign was both passive and active. Passively, he continued to be the golden child whose every achievement was celebrated while my accomplishments were ignored or minimized. Every family gathering, every social media post, every conversation revolved around his continued success and bright future. But Jake also took an active role in spreading malicious gossip about my mental health issues throughout his high school and the broader community. His friends and teammates were recruited to share stories about my weird behavior and family problems across their social media networks. The second major betrayal came from within my inner circle when my cousin Diana revealed her true allegiance. Diana had been my confidant throughout the initial crisis, listening to my frustrations and offering apparent support during our private conversations. I had shared my deepest fears about my career, my financial struggles, and my emotional pain, trusting her as the one family member who understood my perspective. But Diana had been feeding every detail of our conversations directly back to my parents, providing them with intelligence about my vulnerabilities and plans. The discovery of Diana's betrayal was devastating because it revealed the sophisticated nature of my family's manipulation. They hadn't just attacked me directly, they had infiltrated my support system and turned my closest ally into a double agent. Every moment of vulnerability I had shared with Diana had been weaponized against me. Every strategy I had discussed for dealing with the family crisis had been reported back to my enemies. I realized that my family was playing a much more complex game than I had understood. My childhood best friend Kelly completed the circle of betrayal by choosing my family's version of events over our years of friendship. Kelly had grown up practically as a member of our household, spending countless hours with our family and witnessing the favoritism firsthand. But when forced to choose sides, she sided with my parents, claiming they were good people going through a difficult time with a troubled daughter. Her defection was particularly painful because she had seen the truth of our family dynamics with her own eyes. Yet she chose to believe the manufactured narrative rather than support me. The isolation was suffocating. Every relationship I had counted on for support had been either poisoned by my family's lies or revealed to be fundamentally unreliable. My extended family had chosen sides based on my parents' manipulation. My professional reputation was under attack from multiple directions, and my financial resources were being systematically eliminated. I felt like I was fighting a war against an enemy that had unlimited resources and no moral constraints, while I was bound by ethics and honesty that made me an easy target. My attempts to fight back legally only made things worse. When I consulted with a lawyer about my family's harassment and defamation, I discovered that my parents had better legal connections and more financial resources to sustain a prolonged battle. The lawyer warned me that fighting back would likely result in escalated attacks and could further damage my medical career. I was trapped in a situation where defending myself would only provide my family with more ammunition to use against me. The systematic destruction of my support network entered a new phase of calculated cruelty that revealed the true extent of my family's coordination and planning. What had initially seemed like random attacks, motivated by favoritism, was revealed to be a comprehensive campaign designed to isolate me completely from any source of emotional, professional, or financial support. They weren't just punishing me for challenging their narrative. They were methodically destroying every aspect of my life that existed outside their control. The family meeting that sealed my fate was called under the pretense of working things out and healing our relationships. My parents invited the entire extended family to what they described as an intervention designed to help me work through my issues and rejoin the family community. Aunts, uncles, cousins, and grandparents gathered at my childhood home for what I expected to be a mediated discussion about our conflicts. Instead, I walked into a coordinated ambush where every family member had been coached to deliver prepared statements about my concerning behavior and need for professional help. My grandmother Ruth, whose opinion carried enormous weight within the family hierarchy, opened the meeting by reading from prepared notes about my pattern of unstable behavior dating back to childhood. She reframed every moment of independence or academic achievement as evidence of antisocial tendencies and inability to prioritize family relationships. My perfect grades were described as obsessive behavior. My part-time jobs were evidence of inability to accept family support. And my medical career aspirations were characterized as delusions of grandeur that separated me from my roots. Uncle Thomas, my father's brother whom I had always respected, delivered a devastating analysis of my financial irresponsibility and lack of gratitude for family investments in my education. He had somehow obtained detailed information about my student loans, living expenses, and employment history, which he used to paint a picture of someone who was bleeding the family dry while giving nothing in return. The invasion of my financial privacy was shocking, but the calculated cruelty of using that information to humiliate me in front of the entire family was breathtaking. My parents had orchestrated the meeting with legal precision, recording everything to document my inappropriate responses to their reasonable concerns. They had consulted with a family lawyer about the best approaches for building a case for potential guardianship proceedings if my mental health continued to deteriorate. Every question was designed to elicit defensive responses that could be characterized as evidence of instability. Every emotional reaction was framed as proof that I was incapable of rational discussion about family matters. The lock-changing incident that followed the family meeting was the first concrete action that demonstrated they viewed me as an enemy rather than a family member. I returned home from a particularly brutal shift at the hospital to find that my childhood bedroom had been stripped of all personal belongings and converted into a storage area for Jake's baseball equipment. My clothes, books, photos, and mementos had been packed into boxes and placed in a rented storage unit across town. The key was left with a note explaining that I was no longer welcome in the family home until I sought appropriate professional help for my issues. The symbolic violence of this action was devastating. My childhood home, which should have been a place of refuge during the most difficult period of my life, was now actively hostile territory. Family photos displayed throughout the house had been edited or replaced to minimize my presence, creating a visual narrative where Jake was the only child who mattered. Holiday displays, graduation pictures, and family portraits had been carefully curated to present the image of a happy family of 4 rather than 5. I had been systematically erased from the family's visual history. The professional consequences intensified as rumors about my family problems spread throughout the medical community. Patients began requesting different doctors after hearing whispered concerns about my emotional stability. Fellow residents started avoiding me to protect their own reputations from association with someone under investigation by the medical board. Attending physicians who had previously been supportive began treating me with professional distance, unwilling to risk their careers by mentoring someone with a complicated background. The third and most devastating betrayal came from Aunt Margaret, whom I had considered my last ally within the family structure. Margaret had been my lifeline during the darkest moments of the crisis, offering emotional support and practical advice while seemingly standing apart from the family's coordinated attacks. She had listened to my fears, validated my experiences, and provided hope that not everyone in the family had been poisoned against me. Our conversations had been my primary source of comfort during months of isolation and professional attacks. The revelation of Margaret's betrayal was accidentally discovered when I arrived early for one of our coffee meetings and overheard her telephone conversation with my mother. Margaret was providing detailed reports about our conversations, including direct quotes from my most vulnerable moments and strategic information about my plans for dealing with the family crisis. She had been recording our conversations on her phone and sharing the audio files with my parents, giving them real-time intelligence about my emotional state and intended responses to their attacks. The sophistication of Margaret's deception was staggering. She had been playing the role of supportive aunt while simultaneously serving as a spy for my parents. Every word of comfort she had offered was designed to extract more information about my vulnerabilities. Every piece of advice she had given was calculated to guide me toward responses that would benefit my parents' campaign. She had been deliberately encouraging me to share my deepest fears and most painful experiences, knowing that this information would be weaponized against me. The discovery that even my therapeutic relationship with Margaret was fabricated sent me into a psychological crisis that nearly ended my medical career. The betrayal was so complete and so carefully orchestrated that I began questioning my ability to judge character or trust my own perceptions. If Margaret, who had seemed genuinely supportive and caring, was actually working against me, how could I trust anyone? The paranoia that followed this revelation made it impossible to form new relationships or maintain existing professional connections. The breaking point came during a particularly difficult surgery rotation, when the accumulated stress of family betrayal, professional sabotage, and complete isolation triggered a panic attack that required my removal from the operating room. The incident provided my family with exactly the evidence they needed to support their claims about my mental instability. Hospital administration was forced to place me on medical leave pending psychological evaluation, effectively suspending my residency program and jeopardizing my entire medical career. During the 3 days I spent living in my car after being evicted from my apartment due to the family's legal maneuvers, I seriously considered suicide as the only escape from the impossible situation they had created. My family had successfully destroyed my professional reputation, eliminated my financial resources, isolated me from all support systems, and weaponized the medical community against me. Every attempt to fight back had been anticipated and countered with greater force. I felt like I was drowning in quicksand, where every movement to save myself only pulled me deeper into destruction. The moment that saved my life came when Dr. Williams, one of the attending physicians who had witnessed my commitment and skill during better times, found me on the hospital roof during a particularly dark moment. Instead of immediately calling security or psychiatric emergency services, he sat with me and listened to my story without judgment. For the first time in months, someone in a position of authority heard my account of the systematic harassment and betrayal without immediately dismissing it as evidence of mental illness. Dr. Williams became the first genuine ally I had encountered during the entire crisis. He had observed the pattern of anonymous complaints and rumors surrounding my case and had begun to suspect that something more complex was happening than simple stress-related breakdown. His willingness to consider alternative explanations for my behavior, provided the first ray of hope I had experienced in months. He helped me access resources for documenting the harassment and connected me with mental health professionals who specialized in family abuse rather than individual pathology. The decision to completely disappear from my family's life began during those conversations with Dr. Williams. He helped me understand that I was dealing with a coordinated campaign of psychological warfare rather than typical family conflict, and that traditional approaches to reconciliation were not only ineffective but actually dangerous to my well-being. The realization that my family would never stop their attacks as long as I remained within their reach led to the conclusion that disappearance was my only option for survival. The false peace offering that arrived 6 weeks later was so perfectly timed and expertly crafted that I almost fell for their manipulation, despite everything I had learned about their tactics. My parents' sudden change in tone was triggered by the approach of my cousin Jennifer's wedding, a major family event where my conspicuous absence would raise questions among extended family members who weren't fully informed about our conflict. They needed me present to maintain their image as loving, united parents, but they also saw the wedding as an opportunity to stage their most devastating attack yet. My mother's phone call came on a Tuesday evening when I was at my emotional lowest point, barely surviving on the kindness of Dr. Williams and a few sympathetic colleagues who had begun to question the official narrative about my instability. Susan's voice was warm and maternal in a way I hadn't heard in months, filled with what seemed like genuine remorse and love. She claimed that she and my father had been doing a lot of soul-searching about their behavior and had realized they had overreacted to what she now described as normal family stress. The apology seemed heartfelt and specific, addressing many of the grievances I had tried to communicate during our previous confrontations. Susan acknowledged that missing my graduation had been a terrible mistake and admitted that they had prioritized Jake unfairly during my medical school years. She spoke about wanting to make things right and rebuild our relationship before it's too late. The conversation included references to specific incidents that demonstrated she understood the depth of hurt they had caused, suggesting genuine reflection and growth. My father's follow-up call was equally convincing, though delivered in his characteristic direct style. Robert acknowledged that his professional undermining of my medical career had been completely inappropriate and claimed he had already begun correcting those conversations with his business contacts. He promised to use his influence to repair any damage he had caused to my reputation and expressed genuine-sounding pride in my academic achievements. His willingness to admit fault was so uncharacteristic that it seemed to signal authentic change. The invitation to Thanksgiving dinner was presented as a gesture of good faith, an opportunity for the family to come together and begin healing. My parents promised a judgment-free environment where we could focus on gratitude and family bonds rather than past conflicts. They specifically mentioned wanting to celebrate my medical accomplishments properly and make up for their absence at graduation. Jake had supposedly expressed interest in learning more about my career and possibly shadowing me at the hospital. Even my grandmother Ruth had asked specifically for my presence at the holiday gathering. The pressure from extended family members to accept this olive branch was enormous. Cousins, aunts, and uncles, who had been carefully managed by my parents' narrative, reached out to encourage reconciliation. They painted my parents as heartbroken parents who had made mistakes but were genuinely committed to making amends. Jennifer, whose wedding was driving this sudden peace initiative, personally called to beg me to give them another chance and not let family drama overshadow her special day. Against the advice of Dr. Williams, who warned me about the potential for escalated manipulation, I agreed to attend Thanksgiving dinner. My decision was driven by exhaustion from months of isolation and a desperate hope that my family might genuinely want to repair our relationship. I couldn't bear the thought of spending another holiday alone, and the possibility of reclaiming some connection to my roots was too tempting to resist. I spent money I didn't have on thoughtful gifts for each family member and prepared an emotional speech about forgiveness, growth, and the importance of family bonds. I practiced responses to potential difficult moments and prepared myself to be gracious and mature in the face of any remaining tensions. I even bought a new dress for the occasion, wanting to look successful and put together to demonstrate that their attacks hadn't broken me completely. The ambush I walked into on Thanksgiving Day was so professionally orchestrated that it must have required weeks of planning and possibly legal consultation. Instead of the family dinner I expected, I found myself facing what could only be described as a formal intervention, complete with prepared statements, recording equipment, and a family friend who claimed credentials as a therapist. The dining room had been arranged like a conference room, with chairs in a circle and notepads distributed to each participant. My parents had consulted with Dr. Patricia Hoffman, a family friend who worked in psychiatric social services, to design what they called a structured intervention to address my ongoing mental health crisis. Dr. Hoffman opened the meeting by reading clinical-sounding statements about family systems dysfunction and individual psychological pathology that painted me as the primary source of family conflict. Her pseudo-professional authority lent credibility to what was essentially a coordinated attack. Each family member had been assigned specific topics to address during their prepared statements. My father focused on financial irresponsibility and professional misconduct, reading from notes that documented every dollar the family had spent on my education and every professional contact he had made on my behalf. My mother delivered an emotional performance about the heartbreak of watching her daughter spiral into mental illness and the sleepless nights she spent worrying about my well-being. Jake's contribution was perhaps the most devastating because of his convincing portrayal of genuine fear and concern. He described feeling unsafe around me due to my unpredictable mood swings and threatening behavior, referencing incidents that had never occurred or grossly mischaracterizing normal sibling disagreements. His performance was so compelling that I began questioning my own memories of our interactions, wondering if I had somehow traumatized him without realizing it. The systematic character assassination continued with Emma's recitation of my supposed pattern of antisocial behavior throughout childhood and adolescence. She had been coached to reinterpret every instance of academic achievement or independence as evidence of underlying psychological problems. My perfect grades became obsessive-compulsive behavior. My part-time jobs were inability to maintain normal peer relationships, and my medical career aspirations were grandiose delusions that demonstrated disconnect from reality. The fourth major betrayal was revealed when Emma produced a collection of secretly recorded phone calls from our conversations over the past 6 months. She had been recording every private conversation we had during the family crisis, editing the audio to remove context and create compilations that made me sound threatening, irrational, and unstable. The violation of trust was staggering, but the technical sophistication of the edited recordings suggested professional assistance in creating this evidence. The intervention culminated with the presentation of legal documents that my parents and Dr. Hoffman had prepared for my signature. These papers would commit me to intensive psychiatric treatment, grant my parents temporary guardianship authority over my medical and financial decisions, and require me to withdraw from my residency program pending successful completion of therapy. They claimed these measures were necessary for my own protection and the safety of future patients who might be harmed by my untreated mental illness. The recording equipment that had been running throughout the intervention was intended to capture my inappropriate responses to their reasonable concerns about my mental health. Every moment of anger, confusion, or emotional distress was being documented as evidence to support potential involuntary commitment proceedings. They had created a sophisticated trap where any normal response to their attacks would be characterized as further proof of my instability. When I attempted to leave the intervention, my father blocked the door and informed me that they had consulted with attorneys about their duty to protect both me and the public from my dangerous behavior. The implicit threat was that refusing to sign their documents would trigger legal proceedings that would be even more damaging to my career and reputation. They had positioned themselves as loving parents making difficult decisions to protect a mentally ill child, while I was cast as the dangerous, unstable person who refused appropriate treatment. The breaking point came when my Uncle Thomas revealed that they had already contacted my residency program to discuss my family's concerns about my fitness for practice. Hospital administration had been informed that my family was staging an intervention and would be providing updates about my cooperation with treatment recommendations. My medical career was being held hostage to force compliance with their psychological warfare. The police were called when neighbors reported the sounds of conflict from our house, but my family's preparation extended to this possibility as well. When officers arrived, they found a roomful of concerned family members trying to help a clearly distressed young woman who was refusing treatment for obvious mental health issues. The physical evidence of my distress, my emotional responses to their attacks, and their coordinated testimony painted me as the aggressor in a situation where I was actually the victim. The arrest that followed was based on my family's coordinated claims that I had physically threatened them when they tried to prevent me from leaving. Multiple family members provided matching statements about my violent behavior and threats against family safety. The fact that I had never touched anyone or made any threats was irrelevant against their unified testimony and the recorded evidence of my emotional instability during the intervention. Spending the night in jail while my family gave interviews to local media about their dangerous daughter, who had finally revealed her true nature, was perhaps the most humiliating experience of my entire life. The mugshot that was leaked to local news outlets, combined with my family's narrative about mental illness and violent behavior, destroyed any remaining credibility I might have had in the community. The charges were eventually dropped when security footage from neighboring houses contradicted their claims, but the damage to my reputation was permanent. The aftermath of my false arrest marked the point of no return in my family's campaign of destruction. Even though the criminal charges were eventually dropped due to contradictory evidence, the damage to my professional and personal reputation was catastrophic and permanent. My residency program, facing pressure from hospital administration and concerned about liability issues, made the devastating decision to terminate my position despite my previously excellent performance record. The official reasons cited ongoing personal issues that interfere with professional responsibilities. But everyone understood the real message. My family's lies had succeeded in destroying my medical career. The medical license suspension that followed was the final nail in the coffin of everything I had worked toward since childhood. The state medical board, responding to the anonymous complaints and arrest record, launched a formal investigation into my fitness for practice. Even though the criminal charges had been dropped, the board treated the family intervention and arrest as evidence of concerning behavior patterns that required extensive evaluation before I could be permitted to treat patients. The investigation process would take months or years, during which time I would be unable to work in any medical capacity. My family's victory lap following my professional destruction was both thorough and methodical. My parents gave carefully crafted interviews to local media outlets, positioning themselves as heartbroken parents who had tried everything to help their troubled daughter before she finally crossed the line into dangerous behavior. They spoke with practiced sorrow about the difficult decision to involve law enforcement and their hope that she gets the help she needs. The community rallied around them as victims of their own child's mental illness. Jake's college fund became the beneficiary of an outpouring of community support that was directly tied to my downfall. Local businesses, church groups, and family friends organized fundraisers to help the Mitchell family recover from this tragedy and ensure that Jake's promising future wouldn't be jeopardized by his sister's problems. The irony was suffocating. My destruction was literally funding my brother's continued success, with community members proudly contributing to the family that had systematically dismantled my life. The extended family's complete abandonment of me was swift and absolute. Cousins who had grown up alongside me, aunts and uncles who had watched me develop from childhood, and grandparents who had claimed to love me all cut contact to protect their own reputations from association with the family's troubled member. Wedding invitations were rescinded, holiday gatherings proceeded without me, and family social media accounts were carefully curated to present the image of a tight-knit clan dealing bravely with external challenges. The ultimate betrayal came from Dr. Williams, the one person whose support had kept me functioning during the darkest period of the crisis. Under pressure from hospital administration and threats to his own career advancement, Dr. Williams was forced to choose between supporting me and protecting his professional future. The choice, though painful, was inevitable. He scheduled a private meeting where he awkwardly explained that he could no longer serve as my mentor or advocate due to institutional pressures and professional obligations. The revelation that even Dr. Williams had been secretly reporting our conversations to hospital administration was devastating beyond words. I discovered that our therapy sessions, which I had viewed as confidential discussions with a trusted mentor, had actually been documented and shared with medical board investigators as evidence in their case against me. Every moment of vulnerability I had shared with him had been weaponized against me by the very institution that was supposed to protect physician wellness and mental health. My desperate attempt to expose the truth through secret recordings of my family admitting to their lies represented my final, failed effort to fight back using their own tactics. I had learned to think like them, to plan deceptively, and manipulate situations to gather evidence. But even when I succeeded in recording Jake bragging about his role in destroying my career and my parents laughing about their successful campaign, the evidence proved useless when my family's lawyer obtained an injunction preventing me from using the recordings in any public forum. The legal system had been completely manipulated against me through my family's superior resources and connections. Their attorney had relationships with judges, court clerks, and other lawyers that gave them enormous advantages in any legal proceeding. They could file motions faster, get favorable hearing dates, and influence procedural decisions in ways that made fair treatment impossible. I was fighting a rigged game with weapons I wasn't allowed to use against opponents who faced no ethical constraints. The protective order that resulted from their claims about my threatening behavior was the final legal mechanism that ensured my complete powerlessness. The court order required me to maintain no contact with any family member under threat of immediate arrest and imprisonment. This meant I couldn't defend myself against their continued lies, couldn't correct false narratives they spread in the community, and couldn't even attend family events where they might be present. They had successfully weaponized the legal system to silence me permanently. The financial devastation that accompanied my professional destruction left me completely dependent on others for basic survival. Legal fees had exhausted the savings I had accumulated during medical school, while the loss of my residency salary eliminated my income entirely. The student loan payments that came due during my unemployment were impossible to manage, leading to defaults that further damaged my credit and future prospects. I was facing potential bankruptcy, while my family enjoyed the financial windfall of community support for Jake's future. The isolation was absolute and suffocating. Professional contacts had been poisoned against me by the rumors and investigations, while personal relationships had been destroyed by my family's systematic campaign of character assassination. Former friends believed the narrative about my mental instability, while potential new connections were scared away by the ongoing legal complications and professional uncertainties. I was trapped in a social and professional wasteland of my family's creation. The meeting with the underground lawyer who specialized in helping people disappear from abusive families was my first glimpse of hope after months of despair. Attorney Sarah Chen worked exclusively with clients who needed to vanish completely from situations where traditional legal remedies had failed. She explained that some family abuse cases were so sophisticated and well-resourced that the only solution was complete disappearance and identity reconstruction. My case, she said, was among the most thorough and systematic examples of family-orchestrated destruction she had encountered. Sarah's explanation of the legal name change process and identity protection procedures opened up possibilities I hadn't considered. She described a network of abuse survivors who had successfully escaped similar situations by completely severing all ties with their biological families and rebuilding their lives under new identities. The process was complex and expensive, but it offered genuine freedom from the ongoing harassment and manipulation that made normal life impossible. The realization that I wasn't alone in facing family-orchestrated abuse was both comforting and disturbing. Sarah showed me case files from other clients who had escaped situations involving financial sabotage, professional destruction, and systematic isolation by family members. The patterns were remarkably consistent: golden child dynamics, coordinated gaslighting campaigns, legal manipulation, and community sentiment management. My family's tactics were drawn from a playbook that other abusive families had used successfully for generations. Jake's final visit, where he arrived at my temporary housing to gloat about his victories and mock my powerlessness, provided the last confirmation I needed about the impossibility of reconciliation. He had driven across town specifically to enjoy my humiliation, bringing photos from family gatherings I had been excluded from and updates about his college plans that were being funded by the community support generated through my destruction. His casual cruelty and obvious pleasure in my suffering eliminated any remaining hope that our family relationships could ever be repaired. The recording I made of Jake's gloating confession would never be admissible in court due to the injunction, but it served as insurance against future harassment and provided clarity about the true nature of my family's motivations. Jake revealed that the campaign against me had been planned for years, triggered by their resentment of my academic achievements and fear that my success would expose their mediocrity. They had viewed me as a threat to their self-image and had systematically worked to eliminate that threat through coordinated psychological warfare. The decision to completely disappear from my family's life was no longer a choice but a necessity for survival. Every attempt to fight back had been anticipated and countered with escalated attacks. Every effort to expose the truth had been twisted into evidence of my instability. Every relationship I tried to maintain had been poisoned by their lies. The only path to freedom was to vanish completely and rebuild my life where they could never find me. The legal name change process became my pathway to freedom and rebirth after months of systematic destruction by my biological family. Attorney Sarah Chen guided me through the complex procedures required to legally shed my identity as Cassandra Mitchell and emerge as Madison Harper, a completely new person with no traceable connections to my past life. The process required traveling to a state with favorable privacy laws and working with specialized legal services that understood the unique needs of abuse survivors seeking protection from dangerous family members. The documentation required for a complete identity change was extensive and expensive, but it represented my only hope for genuine escape from my family's ongoing harassment campaign. I needed sealed court records to prevent my family from discovering my new identity through public record searches, specialized legal protections that would redirect any attempts to locate me, and carefully crafted documentation that would support my new identity in professional and personal contexts. The investment required the last of my financial resources, but the alternative was continued destruction. Creating Madison Harper's backstory required careful attention to detail and legal compliance to ensure that my new identity could withstand scrutiny from employers, licensing boards, and background check services. Sarah worked with me to develop a personal history that explained gaps in my education and employment record without raising suspicious questions. We crafted explanations for why Madison Harper was entering medical practice later than typical graduates and prepared documentation to support these claims. The relocation process involved moving across the country to the Pacific Northwest, where I had no previous connections and my family would be unlikely to search. Seattle offered the combination of excellent medical facilities, strong privacy protections, and a culture that respected people's desires to reinvent themselves without extensive questioning about their past. The distance from my hometown provided both physical and psychological separation from the trauma I was escaping. Establishing basic services under my new identity required navigating complex bureaucratic procedures while maintaining absolute secrecy about my previous life. Opening bank accounts, securing housing, obtaining driver's licenses, and establishing utility services all required documentation that supported Madison Harper's existence while providing no trail back to Cassandra Mitchell. Every interaction with government agencies or service providers carried the risk of accidental disclosure that could compromise my escape. The psychological preparation for complete identity transformation was perhaps the most challenging aspect of the entire process. I had to learn to respond naturally to my new name, develop new personal habits and preferences that felt authentic to Madison Harper, and emotionally distance myself from 24 years of memories and experiences as Cassandra Mitchell. The grief of abandoning my previous identity was profound, even though that identity had become a source of pain and persecution. Working with a therapist who specialized in family estrangement and identity reconstruction helped me process the complex emotions involved in disappearing from my biological family. Dr. Rebecca Torres understood that my situation required complete separation rather than traditional family therapy approaches that assumed eventual reconciliation was possible. She helped me understand that choosing to disappear wasn't abandonment of my family, but rather escape from systematic abuse that would never end voluntarily. The support groups for people who had cut contact with families provided crucial emotional validation during the identity transition process. Meeting other survivors who had successfully escaped similar situations showed me that complete family estrangement was not only possible, but sometimes necessary for survival. Their stories of rebuilding successful lives after disappearing from abusive families gave me hope that Madison Harper could thrive where Cassandra Mitchell had been systematically destroyed. Professional reconstruction began with the complex process of transferring my medical education credentials to my new identity, while maintaining the privacy protections that prevented my family from tracking me through educational or licensing records. This required working with specialized legal services that understood how to navigate medical board procedures while maintaining confidentiality for abuse survivors. The process was slow and expensive, but it represented the only path back to the career I had sacrificed everything to achieve. The letter I sent to my parents announcing my permanent departure was carefully crafted to provide closure while maintaining my security. I informed them that I was leaving forever, that any attempt to locate or contact me would result in restraining orders and criminal charges, and that I considered myself officially orphaned from that point forward. The letter included no forwarding address, no method of contact, and no indication of where I was going or who I was becoming. The emotional weight of sending that final letter was enormous, representing the definitive end of all hope for family reconciliation and the complete abandonment of my previous life. I was voluntarily making myself an orphan, cutting ties with everyone who had known me since birth, and accepting that I would never again have contact with the people who had raised me. The decision was simultaneously liberating and heartbreaking, offering freedom at the cost of belonging. Starting my new life in Seattle as Madison Harper felt like awakening from a nightmare into a world where I could control my own narrative. For the first time in months, I could introduce myself without worrying that people had already heard lies about my character and mental health. I could apply for jobs without fearing that my family would sabotage my applications with false reports. I could form friendships without having to explain the complex trauma that had shaped my recent past. The first apartment I rented under my new identity was a modest studio in Capitol Hill, but it represented absolute freedom from my family's influence and control. The neighbors knew nothing about my past. The landlord had no reason to question my background, and the space was entirely my own to shape according to Madison Harper's preferences rather than Cassandra Mitchell's history. I decorated it with new furniture and belongings that had no connection to my previous life. The process of rebuilding professional credentials was slow and challenging, but every small step forward felt like a victory after months of systematic destruction. I worked with medical licensing authorities who specialized in helping international students and career change professionals navigate complex credentialing procedures. My situation was unusual, but not unprecedented, and the privacy protections built into the process meant that my family would never be able to track my professional activities. My first job interview as Madison Harper was terrifying and exhilarating simultaneously. The interviewer saw me as a complete person with a clean slate, rather than someone defined by family dysfunction and false accusations of mental instability. I could present my medical knowledge and clinical skills without having to overcome preconceptions about my character or fitness for practice. The position was entry-level and temporary, but it represented the beginning of genuine professional rehabilitation. The friendship I developed with Dr. Jennifer Park, a resident physician who became my first genuine supporter in my new life, showed me what healthy professional relationships could look like when they weren't poisoned by outside manipulation. Jennifer knew Madison Harper as a competent colleague and interesting person, with no awareness of the trauma and persecution that had shaped my recent past. Her friendship was based on present interactions rather than past history, offering a glimpse of the life I could build free from family sabotage. The panic that consumed my biological family when they realized I had completely vanished from their reach was both satisfying and terrifying to witness from a distance. Within weeks of my disappearance, they had exhausted their normal methods of surveillance and control, discovering that Cassandra Mitchell had simply ceased to exist in any traceable form. Their initial assumption that I was hiding somewhere nearby quickly gave way to the disturbing realization that I had professional help in disappearing and might never be found. The private investigator they hired, Marcus Webb, was a former police detective with extensive experience in missing persons cases, but he quickly discovered that my disappearance was too professionally executed for standard investigation techniques. Webb's preliminary report, which I learned about through Sarah Chen's monitoring of their activities, revealed his frustration with the complete absence of digital footprints, financial activity, or paper trails that typically allow missing persons to be tracked. He warned my family that they were dealing with someone who had gone underground with expert assistance. My family's desperation intensified when they realized that their entire narrative about having a troubled daughter would collapse if they couldn't produce evidence of my continued existence and ongoing problems. Jake's college applications relied heavily on the community sympathy generated by their story about dealing with a dangerous family member, while my parents' social standing was built on their image as long-suffering parents coping with extraordinary challenges. My disappearance threatened to expose their lies and manipulation. The harassment campaign that followed my vanishing included multiple violations of legal boundaries as my family became increasingly reckless in their attempts to locate me. They filed false police reports claiming I was suicidal or dangerous, hoping to trigger nationwide alerts that might reveal my location. They contacted hospitals throughout the region claiming to be concerned about a missing family member with mental health issues. They even hired additional private investigators to expand their search beyond Webb's initial efforts. My father's use of his business connections to pressure former colleagues and medical contacts for information about my whereabouts crossed clear legal lines and provided evidence for the restraining orders I was preparing to file. Robert Mitchell's phone calls to medical licensing boards, residency programs, and hospitals throughout the Pacific Northwest constituted harassment that was both illegal and professionally unethical. His desperation was making him careless, creating documentation of his stalking behavior. The financial stress on my family from their expensive search efforts began to take its toll as months passed without results. Private investigator fees, legal consultations, and travel expenses for their search activities were draining resources they had planned to use for Jake's college education. The irony was delicious. Their obsession with destroying me was now costing them the money they needed to support their golden child's future. Jake's athletic career, which had been my family's excuse for prioritizing him over me, effectively ended when a routine shoulder injury during his senior year required surgery that revealed extensive damage from years of overuse. The injury that ended his baseball dreams happened while my family was spending thousands of dollars trying to track me down rather than investing in proper medical care for his recurring shoulder problems. Their misplaced priorities finally caught up with them in a way that destroyed their primary justification for years of favoritism. The marriage crisis that developed between my parents as the stress of their failed search campaign exposed the fundamental weaknesses in their relationship was an unexpected consequence of my disappearance. Without a common enemy to blame for their problems, Robert and Susan Mitchell began turning their manipulative tactics against each other. Their relationship, built on shared narcissism and coordinated abuse of their children, couldn't survive when they no longer had external targets for their cruelty. Meanwhile, Madison Harper's life in Seattle was flourishing in ways that Cassandra Mitchell's existence never could have achieved under my family's constant sabotage. My successful completion of a new residency program under strict privacy protections demonstrated that my medical skills had never been the problem. The issue had always been my family's systematic interference with my professional development. Free from their sabotage, I excelled in ways that proved their claims about my incompetence were projection of their own inadequacies. The relationship I developed with Dr. Christopher Wells represented everything my family had tried to prevent me from achieving: genuine love, based on mutual respect, rather than manipulation and control. Christopher knew Madison Harper as a successful physician, caring person, an emotionally healthy partner who contributed positively to his life. He had no awareness of the trauma and abuse that had shaped my recent past, allowing our relationship to develop naturally without the baggage my family would have created. Professional recognition came rapidly once I was free from my family's interference. My research on trauma recovery, ironically inspired by my own experiences with family abuse, was accepted for publication in peer-reviewed journals and gained attention from colleagues throughout the medical community. The speaking engagements and consulting opportunities that followed demonstrated skills and knowledge that my family had tried to convince the world I didn't possess. The mistake that led to my family's legal downfall came when their desperation drove them to violate multiple restraining orders and privacy protections in their attempts to locate me. Webb's investigation had uncovered some basic information about my legal name change, but when he tried to access sealed court records, he triggered security protocols that alerted law enforcement to the harassment campaign. The criminal charges that followed were based on documented evidence of stalking, harassment, and privacy violations spanning multiple states. My Aunt Margaret's attack of conscience, triggered by guilt over her role in my persecution and concern about the increasingly unhinged behavior of my immediate family, led her to contact Sarah Chen with an offer to provide evidence against my parents. Margaret had kept detailed records of the family's coordination against me, including recordings of planning sessions and documentation of their lies to authorities. Her testimony provided the evidence needed to pursue criminal charges against the primary perpetrators. The restraining orders I filed in multiple states created a legal framework that made any future contact attempts by my family members into criminal violations with automatic arrest consequences. The court orders were based on extensive documentation of their harassment campaign and included provisions for electronic monitoring and immediate imprisonment if any family member attempted to locate or contact me. The legal protections were comprehensive enough to ensure my safety permanently. The vindication I experienced when the medical board investigation was reopened and cleared my original record completely was profoundly healing after years of questioning my own perceptions and abilities. The board's review of the sealed evidence from my family's harassment campaign led to formal findings that the original complaints were fabricated and coordinated as part of a systematic abuse campaign. My medical license was fully restored, with a notation that I had been the victim of deliberate character assassination. The job offer from Johns Hopkins Medical Center represented the culmination of my professional rehabilitation and proof that excellence could triumph over coordinated sabotage when given fair opportunity. The position was prestigious enough to validate every sacrifice I had made during medical school and demonstrated that Madison Harper could achieve success that Cassandra Mitchell had been prevented from reaching. The offer came with full knowledge of my background and appreciation for my resilience in overcoming extraordinary challenges. Jake's desperate attempt to reconnect with me through social media after his injury ended his athletic dreams was immediately reported to authorities and resulted in criminal charges for violating the restraining order. His message, attempting to manipulate me into providing financial assistance for his medical bills, provided additional evidence of the family's continued attempts to exploit and control me. The arrest that followed sent a clear message that my legal protections had real consequences. The financial crisis that engulfed my family, as legal fees mounted and Jake's medical expenses grew beyond their ability to pay, was a natural consequence of their years of misplaced priorities and expensive harassment campaigns. They had spent their savings trying to destroy me rather than investing in legitimate support for their children's futures. The community sympathy they had cultivated through lies about my mental illness evaporated when the truth about their harassment campaign became public knowledge. The final confrontation came when my parents made a desperate attempt to approach me at the hospital where I worked, triggering security protocols and automatic arrest procedures under the restraining order. Their appearance at my workplace demonstrated that they had never accepted the reality of my disappearance and were still actively stalking me despite criminal charges and legal consequences. The incident provided definitive proof that they would never voluntarily end their harassment. The criminal prosecution that followed included charges of stalking, harassment, violation of protective orders, and conspiracy to interfere with my professional activities across multiple jurisdictions. The evidence was overwhelming. with years of documented harassment and multiple witnesses to their coordinated campaign. The convictions that resulted created permanent criminal records that validated everything I had claimed about their systematic abuse. The public exposure of their lies through court proceedings destroyed my family's reputation in our hometown and surrounding communities. Local media covered the trial extensively, revealing the sophisticated harassment campaign they had orchestrated and the fabricated claims about my mental health. Community members who had supported Jake's college fund, based on sympathy for my family, demanded refunds when they learned the truth about the situation. The success I achieved as Madison Harper, while my biological family faced legal consequences and social disgrace, was the ultimate vindication of my decision to disappear completely, rather than continue fighting their systematic abuse. Every professional achievement, every healthy relationship, and every moment of genuine happiness proved that the problem had never been my character or capabilities. The problem had always been their coordinated campaign to prevent my success. The transformation from victim to survivor to thriver represented a journey that would have been impossible while remaining connected to my biological family in any form. 5 years after my disappearance, Madison Harper had achieved everything that Cassandra Mitchell had been systematically prevented from accomplishing. The medical career that my family had tried to destroy became the foundation for a life of professional excellence, personal fulfillment, and genuine happiness that exceeded my wildest dreams during the darkest period of their abuse. My promotion to Chief of Trauma Surgery at Seattle Medical Center represented not just professional success, but complete vindication of the medical skills and leadership abilities that my family had tried to convince the world I didn't possess. The position came with recognition from colleagues who knew nothing about my past trauma but respected my clinical competence, research contributions, and ability to inspire excellence in others. Leading a department of accomplished physicians who valued my expertise was profoundly healing after years of having my capabilities questioned and undermined. The research program I developed focusing on trauma, recovery, and resilience became internationally recognized, helping countless survivors of various forms of abuse rebuild their lives and reclaim their potential. The publications, speaking engagements, and consulting opportunities that emerged from this work represented a transformation of my personal trauma into professional expertise that benefited others facing similar challenges. My pain had been converted into purpose in ways that gave meaning to every sacrifice I had made. The mentorship relationships I developed with young physicians from difficult backgrounds became one of the most rewarding aspects of my new life. These students and residents often struggled with imposter syndrome, financial stress, and family pressures that I understood intimately from my own experience. Being able to guide them toward success while protecting them from the sabotage I had endured felt like the ultimate victory over my family's attempts to limit my impact on the world. Christopher and I built a relationship based on mutual respect, genuine love, and shared values that represented everything my family had tried to prevent me from experiencing. He knew Madison Harper as a complete person with her own identity, rather than someone defined by family dysfunction and external manipulation. Our engagement and subsequent marriage created a chosen family built on honesty and support rather than control and favoritism. The wedding celebration, surrounded by friends and colleagues who had become my true family, was more meaningful than any biological family gathering I had ever experienced. The legal protections that continued to shield me from my family's attempts at contact had evolved into a comprehensive security framework that allowed me to live freely without fear of discovery or harassment. The restraining orders were regularly renewed and updated to include new forms of contact as technology evolved. Electronic monitoring services provided real-time alerts if any member of my biological family attempted to approach my home or workplace. The legal team I maintained on retainer ensured that any violation of these protections would result in immediate arrest and prosecution. The attempted contact that occasionally came through mutual acquaintances or indirect channels was immediately documented and reported to authorities as evidence of continued stalking behavior. Each incident strengthened the legal case against my family and demonstrated their inability to accept the finality of my departure. Their persistent attempts to reach me only served to validate my decision to disappear completely rather than attempt any form of limited contact or reconciliation. The grief I experienced over losing connection to extended family members, who had chosen my parents' version of events, was complex and ongoing, but it was overshadowed by relief at escaping the toxic dynamics that had defined my childhood. Some relationships were worth mourning, but most had been built on foundations of family loyalty rather than genuine affection. The cousins, aunts, and uncles who had abandoned me during the crisis had revealed their true character, and their absence from my new life was ultimately a blessing rather than a loss. The financial independence I achieved through my successful medical practice provided security that my family could never again threaten or manipulate. The substantial income, wise investments, and careful savings ensured that I would never be vulnerable to the kind of financial warfare they had used against me during medical school. The charitable contributions I made to organizations helping abuse survivors represented my ability to give back while honoring the support I had received during my escape. The unexpected contact that came 5 years after my disappearance, when my grandmother Ruth reached out through Sarah Chen to admit that the family had been wrong and to beg for forgiveness, was immediately rejected and reported to authorities. Ruth's letter revealed that Jake's injury and failed athletic career had led to family financial crisis and internal conflict that was destroying my parents' marriage. She begged me to consider reconciliation and possibly provide financial assistance for Jake's medical expenses and college education. My response to Ruth's overture was delivered entirely through legal channels, with documentation forwarded to my attorney and copies provided to law enforcement as evidence of continued harassment. I had no interest in my family's financial problems, relationship difficulties, or attempts at manipulation disguised as apologies. Their crisis was the natural consequence of their choices, and I felt no obligation to rescue them from problems they had created through years of abuse and misplaced priorities. The letter from my cousin Diana that followed Ruth's rejected overture was similarly handled through legal channels rather than personal response. Diana's attempt to reconnect was motivated by her own family's financial struggles and the social embarrassment of being associated with my parents' criminal convictions. Her claims about always caring about me and wanting to rebuild family relationships were transparent attempts to access the success I had achieved independently. These manipulations were so obvious that they only reinforced my conviction that complete separation had been the correct choice. The most satisfying moment of vindication came when Jake's accident-related medical bills and continued health problems created financial crisis that forced my family to sell their house and downsize dramatically. The golden child whose success had been prioritized over mine was now a financial burden rather than the investment they had claimed he represented. Their years of favoritism had produced a son with no marketable skills, mounting medical debt, and no prospects for the professional success they had sacrificed my happiness to support. The peace I experienced knowing that my biological family was struggling with consequences of their own choices, while I thrived in my chosen family, was profound and healing. I felt no satisfaction from their specific suffering, but enormous relief that their ability to harm me had been permanently eliminated. Their problems could no longer become my emergency. Their crises could no longer derail my progress, and their approval or disapproval was completely irrelevant to my happiness. The wedding Christopher and I planned was deliberately designed to celebrate the chosen family we had built together, rather than mourning the biological families we had both found inadequate for different reasons. Our ceremony was officiated by Dr. Torres, the therapist who had helped me process the trauma of family estrangement. Our guest list included colleagues, friends, mentors, and other chosen family members who had supported our individual growth and relationship development. The celebration represented triumph over adversity, rather than obligation to tradition. The hospital promotion that made me the youngest department chief in the institution's history was announced the same week that local media reported on my father's conviction and sentencing for stalking charges. The contrast between my professional achievement and his criminal consequences provided a perfect metaphor for the different paths our lives had taken after I chose freedom over family obligation. My success was built on merit and authentic relationships, while his downfall was the result of abuse and manipulation. The research funding I received to expand my trauma recovery program came with recognition that Madison Harper was building a legacy of healing and hope that would impact countless lives. The grants, academic appointments, and professional honors represented achievements that would have been impossible under my family's systematic sabotage. Every success vindicated my decision to prioritize my own potential over their comfort and control. The future I was building with Christopher included plans for children who would grow up in a family built on love, respect, and support, rather than favoritism and manipulation. These children would never experience the kind of systematic abuse I had endured, and they would be raised to value authentic achievement over artificial superiority. Our family would be a place of safety and encouragement, rather than competition and cruelty. The final lesson of my journey was that family is ultimately about choice rather than biology, and that cutting toxic relationships enables authentic growth that would otherwise be impossible. The family I chose provided more love, support, and genuine care than the biological family that had systematically tried to destroy me. The price of freedom from abuse had been high, but the rewards of authentic living were beyond anything I could have imagined during the darkest period of their persecution. As I looked toward a future filled with professional success, personal happiness, and meaningful relationships built on honesty and respect, I felt profound gratitude for the strength I had found to choose survival over submission. My story had become one of triumph rather than tragedy, proving that even the most systematic abuse could be overcome when courage was combined with professional support and absolute commitment to freedom. The message I wanted other survivors to understand was that sometimes the healthiest choice is complete separation from toxic family members, regardless of social expectations or personal guilt. Some relationships are too damaged to repair, some abuse is too systematic to forgive, and some people are too dangerous to maintain contact with regardless of biological connections. Choosing yourself over family obligation is not selfish. It's survival, and survival can lead to a life more beautiful than anything you could have achieved while remaining trapped in abuse. What would you do if your family systematically destroyed everything you had worked for? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and your own well-being? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please hit that like button to help other people find it. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about overcoming family trauma and building chosen families that actually support your dreams. And please share this with anyone who might need to hear that escaping toxic family dynamics is possible and can lead to a life beyond their wildest dreams. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that your family should build you up, not tear you down. When they choose destruction over support, you have every right to choose freedom over obligation.